Well, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, Demystifying Cybersecurity. I'm Trina Sheets, the Executive Director of the National Emergency Management Association. NEMA administers the National Homeland Security Consortium, which is the sponsor for today's webinar. We have a great turnout today, which is very exciting, and it's certainly a clear indicator of the level of interest in the topic of cyber hygiene. I know there are some people participating with us who may not be entirely familiar with the National Homeland Security Consortium, so I'd like to take just a quick moment to describe it for you. The consortium was established by NEMA in 2002 and consists of 21 national associations who voluntarily come together to share information and work collaboratively to address Homeland Security-related challenges. Representatives to the consortium include state and local government, the private sector, and elected officials. Member organizations have expertise in the areas of emergency management, homeland security, fire, law enforcement, public health, EMS, information technology, the National Guard, emergency communications, public works, and more. The consortium is funded through FEMA and the U.S. Department of Homeland Security, and we'd like to take this opportunity to thank them for their support. Now I'd like to introduce our facilitator for today, General Donald Dunbar, and our presenter, Mr. William Pelgrin. Major General Donald Dunbar is Wisconsin's Adjutant General. He commands the Wisconsin National Guard and is responsible for emergency management. He also serves as Wisconsin's Homeland Security Advisor, chairs the Homeland Security Council, and serves as the senior state official for cyber matters. General Dunbar served as the chairman for the Governor's Homeland Security Advisors Council and serves on the executive committee of the Adjutant General Association of the United States. As Adjutant General, he's mobilized more than 7,800 soldiers and airmen for combat operations and led the state through 7 declared Stafford Act emergencies. Mr. William Pelgrin recently retired as President and CEO of the Center for Internet Security and currently serves on its board of directors. CIS is a nonprofit organization focused on enhancing the cybersecurity readiness and response among public and private sector entities. As president and CEO, Mr. Pelgrin led the organization through significant growth and elevated CIS on the national and international stages as a trusted leader in cybersecurity. Mr. Pelgrin has spent more than 2 decades in cybersecurity leadership positions and served as an advocate for improving cybersecurity policy and practice. General Dunbar, I'll now turn the webinar over to you, sir.
Thanks, Trina. Thank you very much, and thanks to the consortium for setting up this webinar, and thanks to my good friend Will Pelgrin for joining us. So I want to set the stage for this demystifying. The idea for this webinar came from our last meeting of the consortium in Miami. We had a pretty good discussion on cyber hygiene, among other things, and there was some feedback among the group that things like cyber hygiene, questionable value because the bad guys just keep getting better. And we had a great discussion about it, and afterwards Trina and I were talking about what we could do to maybe follow up on that topic. The idea here today is not to suggest that cyber hygiene or any other process is a silver bullet, but the purpose of this seminar is to suggest there's a lot that can be done, and what can be done really does matter in the area of cybersecurity. There is risk in cyber, to be sure, but experts suggest that between 80 to 95%, 80 to 95% of the known risk can be eliminated with hygiene strategies like Mr. Pelgrin is going to discuss shortly. It's a simple concept when we talk about cyber hygiene. It's a solid course of action. It's consistent with the NIST framework. Hygiene mitigates risk just like a healthy lifestyle mitigates the chance of getting sick. Shots, if you get your shots, if you have a healthy diet, daily exercise, good sleep habits, all of these are good ideas, but they won't necessarily prevent you from getting the flu or dying early. But I don't think there's a medical professional on the planet that would argue against following these strategies as the best course of action to maintain your health. Likewise, no computer professionals that I'm aware of would argue against these types of strategies, although they wouldn't say that they make you bulletproof. As you'll see, hygiene is easy to understand, but not necessarily easy to accomplish. It's going to take some work. Now, many on the call and the webinar, like me, have responsibilities in emergency management. It's kind of a brave new world. I think as we talk about hygiene, we ought to realize and talk about that in the world we live in, there are two types of emergencies. You have a physical emergency, and you can have a cyber emergency. But more and more, these types of emergencies are coming together, and that makes it more important for folks in this arena to think about how they're going to respond to a cyber event which could lead to physical effects. If you talk to the federal government, you'll find that they have split it. You know, FEMA takes care of the physical emergencies, and DHS, another area, takes care of the cyber emergencies. But a lot of us don't have those kind of resources to have separate approaches. In Wisconsin, we approach all emergencies with the same team. We have one emergency management agency that is responsible for all emergencies from all hazards. And all organizations out there need to think about how they're going to approach it. And hygiene will help in that contemplation. When it comes to emergency management, when it comes to response, we have lots of physical emergencies that we have well-grooved responses to. Those of us on the call who are in the emergency management world know that for a tornado or a flood, we know the types of processes and procedures that are going to work to recover. That doesn't mean that tornadoes aren't devastating and can't take life and destroy property, or that floods can't be devastating. But most states and most locals have had to deal with that at one level or another and have a pretty good plan to approach that. Cyber is a little different because each day it seems that cyber continues to grow in its importance to our economy, its importance to our processes, and what we really don't have yet in the emergency management world are really solid, well-grooved, understood processes for response. That's not to say that smart people don't understand the zeros and ones and what to do, but unlike regular emergencies or more practiced emergencies where you have NIMS and ICS guiding everything, there's really not connectivity between the top level and the tactical level, and that's one of the areas where hygiene can help us get to. So when it comes to cyber response, anybody who's got responsibility for a process or perhaps emergency management, you need to think about what you need to, as a leader, to make good decisions. I'm a military officer, so I've got what they call CCIRs, or Commander Information Requests. I can tell you, in the state of Wisconsin, if a tornado touches down, I will know about it. Someone will find me, they will make a phone call, they'll wake me up at 3 o'clock in the morning and let me know that the tornado has touched down as soon as we know. Same thing with flooding. When it comes to cyber, we have a list developed, and because I'm the state's senior cyber official, I want to know if we have a data breach in the state of Wisconsin. I want to know if something happens that has our CIO or our CISO concerned about the state's network. And by developing those RFIs as a leader, you can start to understand and develop those solid processes just like we have for other emergencies. And one of the key processes that all of us need to think about, certainly in government, but also in business, is COOP-COG. And for a lot of folks, if you haven't thought about continuity of operations and continuity of government programs and what cyber can do to them and your expectations of how you're going to operate, it's probably an incomplete plan. Best practices, just like this webinar, the idea of getting together with those who have good ideas and borrowing or stealing or learning from each other is a great way to go. I can tell you in Wisconsin, we're developing a cyber disruption plan right now that we are stealing from our good colleagues in Michigan and modifying to meet the needs here in Wisconsin. We've learned great things from Kansas and Washington when it comes to public and private partnerships, and a great deal from the MSISAC and the Department of Homeland Security in how we've set up our approaches here in the state of Wisconsin. And with that, I'm going to stop and turn it over to my colleague, Will Pelgrin, to kind of walk us through the really important part of this brief. Will, over to you.
Hey, General, thank you. It's a pleasure to be here today with you. And for the audience, the General and I will go back and forth as we go through these slides. Demystifying the cybersecurity, the General set the stage extremely nicely as to what we need to do. And he talked about cyber hygiene, and part of my presentation will be talking about a campaign. It's time to start a movement in this country relative to what's going on in the cyber arena. It has to be clear, it has to be actionable, and it has to be effective. Just like what we've done with the oral hygiene campaign, brushing your teeth twice a day, and it helps prevent tooth decay. We do that at infant levels, we do it at the child level, and we also do it at the adult level. And we've done a tremendous job in this country in preventing tooth decay based upon a campaign for oral hygiene. The same thing with safe driving campaign. While seatbelts save lives and buckle up every time, statistically over 50% of those that wear seatbelts reduce the risk of serious injury or death. The type of campaign that these two are just examples of is exactly what we need to do within the cyber arena. We need to create this movement. We've taken all of the cyber attacks that are happening almost as a rite of passage, almost as it's going to happen no matter what we do. We cannot, as a country or as a globe, continue to have that philosophy. We need to have this campaign for America's future. This cyber quiz, I'm not going to ask you to answer these out loud, but I would ask you just quickly think through what your answers be. Have you ever been a victim of a breach? Do you use a simple password or passcode for your device? Do you use the same password for multiple accounts on your devices? Have you clicked on an unknown link or opened an unsolicited attachment? Have you ever used free Wi-Fi? Are all your systems up to date and patched, and do you know what is running on your networks and systems? And I should have had a sign that said all of the above. And I'm put myself in a number of these categories. If you said yes to any one, and my guess is you've said yes to multiple of these, the rest of this presentation is really key for you because it talks about that our behavior has not changed. It talks about that I've been giving the same speech that I gave back in 2003 and the message back in 2003, now in 2015. As the general said, we can prevent, right now, we can address 80 to 90%. The stats, you can get stats, between any of that. I use 85. 85% of the known attack vectors can be addressed by 5 simple steps, by simple cyber hygiene. I'm a big believer that there are certain things within our control and other things outside our control. Let's address those that are within our control, and then we can look at the more complex things, things that are much harder to address, and use our resources for those. But in order to do that, we need to change the behavior. So what is cybersecurity? Demystifying cybersecurity starts with me. What's the definition? So this definition I thought was somewhat humorous. Cybersecurity is anything security related in the cyber realm. And my comment is, huh? Are you, seriously? This is the definition that we have to live with. And we've all heard of CIA and who they are. But let me show you the real CIA in the cyber security arena. It's about confidentiality, it's about integrity, and it's about availability. The confidentiality is protecting the sensitivity of the information from unauthorized access. The integrity is safeguarding the accuracy and completeness of that information. And the availability is ensuring that the information can be used when you want to use it at the time that you need to use it. I once gave a presentation with a 3-star general who said that out of all of these, the most concern that he has is on the integrity of the data. If something gets stolen, we know how to deal with the theft of what that is, whether it's data or a physical environment. But if that data has been changed, meaning the integrity of that data is no longer trustworthy, how do you continue to move forward? How do you in a combat zone understand that the information you're getting is now reliable? How do you in the medical profession know that the medication that you're supposed to give to this patient is the right medication? The consequences from a trust perspective and the underpinning of our whole infrastructure will fall apart. So the integrity is absolutely essential. Back in the day, the perimeter was very well protected. We had a firewall, and we had all our data on one side of it. With that data being on one side, we knew how to protect it, and we also knew if somebody was trying to get in to take it away. What's happened over the years, which is wonderful from a technology and a life benefit perspective, that data has moved. That means that it's with you on a 7/24 basis. Someone said to me, and I just love the line that now with all the mobile devices, there's a third person in the room at all times. There's never just you and your spouse or you and your loved one. There are 2.6 billion internet users and 110 American adult users. When I say that those are victims, there are 2 categories of individuals: those that know that they've had an experience with a cyber event, and those that had it but just don't know it yet. I don't believe anybody hasn't had a cyber event unless you're just not connected at all. But even with that, it doesn't mean that data about you may not be posted someplace in that digital footprint out there called the internet.
And Will, if I could add, you know, when you come to these 2.6 billion and folks around the world, you get sophisticated folks who are using the internet and unsophisticated. And you might think, well, the guy who buys a computer and doesn't update his stuff, no problem for me. But it is a problem for you if that guy's walking into your network with a handheld phone or not practicing good cyber on his end. He can affect you in ways you didn't even anticipate coming. Thank you.
Absolutely. And, you know, even the simplest things like people having great policies that says you cannot plug devices into your computers, meaning like a thumb drive or other external drives into your computer. One day you walk into an office and somebody has a digital photograph that's plugged in, not thinking that that was anything other than showing the pictures of their family. And in reality, as we all know now, a number of those digital devices, those digital photographic picture frames, were containing malware. So even the conscious nature of what we do can have a major impact on our infrastructure. Absolutely correct, General. We're under persistent attack. I can't say it any more plainly. It is constant. It is every second of the day. This is actual attacks that we've mapped. You think that this alone would be devastating just in itself. Each of these represent a geographical point on the Earth. So if I click on any one, it will expand and show the real magnitude of what we are facing. And each of those can expand exponentially as well. So the road ahead, 2015. The year in cybersecurity, what are the threats to really watch for in 2015? And then we'll end up on the cyber hygiene and how we address those threats. McAfee quote, which I really love, was security has gone from the back burner to something more tangible and real for the average person, which is absolutely the case. We are now talking about this collectively. However, I still maintain that we haven't changed our behaviors. Even with all of this knowledge and all of this information that is out every single day, we're still doing things that create harm and potentially both physical consequences as well as cyber consequences. These are the top reasons why we need cyber hygiene. We're going to go through a number of them very quickly, but they're all predicated. If there weren't vulnerabilities, we wouldn't have to worry about these, but there are known vulnerabilities, and they're constantly out there. So all of the threats take advantage of some vulnerability, whether it's human or from a technology perspective. Massive data hemorrhaging, the end of privacy is, you know, we're leaking every time we walk with data. You know, you walk by certain stores now, and information will be pumped to your smartphone. Sadly, there are over 800 million plus records that contain personal sensitive information that have involved in a security breach since the security breach notification laws came into effect back in the 2005. This is only from 2005 to 2014, so it doesn't include some of the more current ones that we're going to talk about. But what this says to me, again, people are growing up in this day and age with their data compromised. When you look at the 800 million, just think about, you know, that's almost 3 times the population of the United States. We're also doing it to ourselves. We're putting data out in the atmosphere through the internet. Our digital footprint is everywhere. I recommend constantly you should Google yourself. Make sure that you Google yourself, your loved ones, and see what is out there. See what is being posted, and it's amazing what you can get back. We once did an analysis of a global company, and we were able to identify their whole 509 staff, where they were, where they worked, and what their jobs were. And we were able to go beyond that. Only from public posting of information that is critical. So we have given up a lot of our privacy lives on social media. It's everywhere. And I'm not saying don't do it. Let's just be smart about it. When I was young, we didn't have the internet. We didn't have social media. So if I did something stupid, it stayed local. You do something stupid now, it goes global. So one of the big breaches. This is you know, whether you think it impacts you or not, it's devastating to think about the massive nature of this. 21.5 million people had their personal data stolen. This is from the Office of Personnel Management. This had to do with security clearances. So when you think about everybody's data is important. If it's your data, it's the most important thing to you. But when you think about security clearances and the amount of data that they collect relative to the individuals to give them that security clearance, to have that breach, and the potential consequences for those individuals, both from a security perspective and a physical perspective, is frightening. Just recently, they announced that in addition to that 21.5 million people, 1.1 million of their fingerprints have also been compromised. Now you've gone from data being compromised to DNA being compromised. How do you get your DNA back? I'll go through these very quickly. The Anthem, 80 million. This is an exploit kit. This was only 3 days. Look at the red. The red indicates over 140-some plus thousand individuals that were affected by this. United States, the former USSR, Russia, the whole complex with Ukraine and others were the highest level of this. This was an exploit kit that dealt with financial fraud exploitation. Data breaches, again, Target, Neiman Marcus, Home Depot, all of those just is, it used to be front page news, and sadly it's become after the sports page. It's happening so regularly, unless it's one of the massive ones that now we see, like Target, Home Depot, and others. But it is happening at a rate that we can't continue. We have to have this campaign. We have to have cyber hygiene in place. We will see in 2015 ransomware to continue. Ransomware is where your computers are infected. It locks your documents up, i.e. encrypts it so that you can't get access, and then demands payment for you. The hackers and some of them will do just a normal saying that you have generally it's about a week to pay up, or that data will be forever lost. Some of them are funny when they try to give you those clocks that time down if you're not going to pay. And even if you do pay, it doesn't mean you're going to be able to encrypt your data. So ransomware will continue. I think this is important that James Clapper, the Director of National Intelligence, has said on more than one occasion that cyber threats more dangerous. Is ranking one of the highest threats worldwide to the United States. He most recently talked about the Russian military were setting up cyber command to carry out attacks. That China, Iran, North Korea as leading threats. That the online assaults would increasingly undermine U.S. economy. A lot of these that are occurring are coming through, you would think, some of them are potentially very sophisticated. However, most hackers will take the least common denominator to get into your infrastructure. So if you're vulnerable, if you're doing things that are bad cyber hygiene, they're going to take that route versus try to launch something that's really complex and sophisticated. So that's why cyber hygiene is so essential. Director Kumi also says cyber threat is a top priority. The advanced persistent threat is what we call a nation-state, generally state attack. It has to do with espionage. It has actors that are well-funded, organized groups, highly motivated, very skilled, and very tenacious. They want to get into your system. They want to stay in your system for periods of time. They do not want to get caught. They will move laterally within your system. And the sole goal for them is to exfiltrate information, your intellectual property. General Alexander, former NSA, had said that in this particular case, talking about advanced persistent threat, China is conducting the greatest pillaging of wealth in history, and that's of our data. So who would be a target? And when you look at sectors of interest, every single one of these are things that government runs. We run some of the biggest banks in the world, some of the biggest transportation systems of the world, the biggest healthcare, military, maybe not in the percentage rates that the private sector does, but government crosses all of those sectors. That's why into advanced persistent threat or nation-state attacks and espionage is something that we all have to take very seriously and look at it from the perspective, how do I protect my data? How do I protect that intellectual property? Mandiant's 2015 report said, out of those compromises, you're only going to find 31% of them on your own. 69% will be found by somebody else outside your infrastructure, and that they will be in there for at least 205 days, and the longest presence was 2,900 plus days that they were in your environment. And again, they're in your environment for one reason and only, is to aggregate that data and to ultimately exfiltrate that data. Hacktivists, again, will be an issue, especially in the public sector. We've seen anytime that there's a perceived social wrong that they want to right, that they believe that they are the social police towards improving what they believe is the right cause and the right. So when things happen with your environment, be aware that they will be very active still in 2015. Phishing used to be easier to identify. Actually, bad grammar, misspellings, etc. And they would, if you got tricked, it was just because you weren't reading properly. You were just clicking very quickly. But it's now all much more professional. It's well written. It appears credible. It comes from apparent trusted sources. It's subject relevant, and it's generally, when it's spear phishing, it's targeted towards specific individuals or sectors. Here's one from a former one from the FBI. This is an old one from 2010. Allegedly came from the FBI. It was about the terrorist use of toxic chemicals, and it had a report allegedly attached on it. It looked very professional, very real. If you got this, especially if you just came back from a conference on terrorist use of toxic chemicals, I could see very quickly everybody clicking on it, including myself. Mobile devices, we love them and we hate them from a cybersecurity perspective. They've allowed us to be incredibly mobile in what we do and how we do it, but they come at a price. Sadly, way too often there's not enough protections that are layered on it, no encryption. The devices are lost at a rate that you'll see is staggering. When they get broken or they're old, we toss them out, we don't cleanse them, and that data is still resident on that. And no passwords and no timeouts. And I tell people, if you have a password but you don't have a timeout, meaning that your device doesn't lock up after a period of time, take the password off, because it's not doing any good, because the likelihood that you're going to lose it is during that period of time when you've already activated it and it'll be live. And once it's in the possession of someone who wants to do wrong, they have all the time in the world to guess your stuff. So it really is important that all of these layers are in place. And then the thumb drive is the bane of all our existence. And we love them, but they should be encrypted, and they really should be limited to your organization's infrastructure, not allowing any external drive to go in unless the security people know and they can scan it before it gets connected to your network. 637,000 laptops reported every year lost at 106 of the largest airports, and sadly 65% of them are never reclaimed. Think about the data on it. I can't think anyone could articulate right now that a mobile device doesn't contain some type of data, whether it's personal or organizational data, that you wouldn't want somebody else to have. It's because we're so connected 7/24, especially with bring your own devices. Those devices mean you've got data on it you don't want anybody else to see. Sadly, old and unpatched, vulnerable, this is one of the major tenets of the first phase of our cyber hygiene campaign, is to make sure that you are running systems that are as protected as they can be. Two that I want to point out, Windows XP was discontinued in April, and sadly the Navy just came out, I believe, and indicated that they still have over 100,000 devices that are needed that still run XP, and they're working now, and they've got an agreement with Microsoft to continue patching them until such time as they can migrate off. But it is very, very expensive to do. Windows Server 2003 actually expires today. It's actually on July 14th, but it is already gone, so today is July 18th. So for those that are still running 2003, that means you are unsupported and that their system will now become vulnerable as time goes on. The human factor, just real quickly on this, we become a clickaholic society. That how many of your employees would click on an attachment even if you told them not to, even if you told them if you don't know where it's coming from, even if you told them that that attachment was malicious and it could corrupt your systems. Too many of the individuals would still do it, whether it's because they're too busy and they're not reading things carefully, or they're just curious, or they don't understand the consequence. But that behavior is something that's essentially needs to change. Passwords, list of the most common passwords. This list rarely changes, which is really frightening that it doesn't change. But 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 0. I say this person was just lazy. I mean, just to put a 0 in there, it just makes no sense. But to tell you how prevalent this, the Syrian president, his password was 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. and access to 78 accounts belonging to his staff used either 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 or 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And we can't just point externally offshore for problems. The United States, for 20 years, the launch code for the U.S. Nuclear weapon was 8 zeros. I guess they wanted to make it easy if we actually needed to do that. I'm pleased to say that's no longer the code. At least that's my understanding. Password reuse. Again, I asked this question at the beginning. This is something that is absolutely essential that you take incredibly seriously. If you use the same password on multiple of your accounts, meaning the password you log on to your organization's network is the same one that I do for my Facebook or my other social media or for my shopping, the likelihood of that compromise now has just grown exponentially. And the reason is that in order to get that information, you may protect that infrastructure and that password very carefully within your environment. Others may not be doing it as well as you are. And we've seen compromises of associations and others where those passwords are harvested by the hackers. Then they come to the organization and they use that password, your credentials, they get in, they've authenticated, and it's as if you were doing it, but it's the hacker. Smart everything. I mean, we've connected every device to every possible machine out there. Some of it's absolutely wonderful. When you think of mobile medical devices, that it gives individuals a quality of life that they've never had before, I think it's absolutely phenomenal, and I think that's what this country is made about. But when my refrigerator and my toaster are arguing over, you know, who's going to get priority of electricity that day, I mean, I think we've got to say that it's great, but what are the security issues? What are the implications of all of this? Are these devices talking? You know, my car is talking to the car in front of me, and my cruise control will slow up if that car is going too slow. Great from a safety and security perspective. All is wonderful. All we need to do is make sure that there is security, because in the wrong hands, somebody playing with that can create now a major physical event. So I give up. I want to throw in the towel. I'm done. It's too much. It's daunting. Cyber attacks, there's nothing I can do. No, giving up is not an option. We need to, as a country, as a globe, seriously, come together. We need to find a new path. We need to have that path that changes behavior, and it's called the Cyber Hygiene Campaign. I am so pleased to be partnering with the Homeland Security Advisors. General Dunbar is a leader among leaders. What he has done nationally with all the Homeland Security Advisors, as well as amazing being a leader in Wisconsin for bringing the right people to the table to talk about these issues, but more importantly, to do something about these issues is a model that should be studied and replicated. But the hygiene campaign is simple but powerful. It applies a few basic hygiene behaviors that will mitigate the majority of the known attack vectors. Implementing these will allow us then to take our resources and allocate those resources to more difficult cyber challenges. So what are they? First, count. What does that mean? It means understand what you run, what you have, what's connected to you, and what is running on your network. I don't know how you protect something you don't know you're running. And I got to tell you, some software has embedded software in it. So you may think you're running XYZ software, and in addition to XYZ, you've got also 1, 2, 3 running in there as well. So really understanding that, counting that inventory is essential. Then once you know what you have, let's configure it. Let's make it as secure as possible. There is no silver bullet, as the general said, but then let's configure it. We know best practices as a group. We can and will, part of this campaign, give you the best practices of what to implement. We're tracking this very closely to the NIST, the federal government NIST framework. Our benchmark materials are also built in this. Our critical controls are also built into this, meaning that industry-led experts have said, here's the best configuration for the known vulnerabilities that we have today. So configure that, making sure that those key security settings to help protect your system. Then control that environment, meaning who gets access to what. When I was head of my organization, just by my title, they wanted to give me access to every file, every control, everything. I wanted to have the least access, because I knew I could get it if I wanted to because I was the boss, but at the same time, you don't need to, by title, have that. Think about what you really need. That will protect your environment more than anything else if you can limit and manage administrative privileges. then patch and patch and patch and patch. It's an unending cycle. However, you got to get this where it is critically done at a time where you're not, 3 weeks after a vulnerability is launched. 0-day exploits. That meant that a exploit was happening, meaning an attack was going to come that was actively being attacked before we knew there was a vulnerability, before the people who had those systems. That used to be a theory back when I started. It's now becoming almost the norm as to how these are occurring, that we're finding out after the fact, and we're seeing exploits out in the wild, and we're finding out that there's a vulnerability. So we need to move very quickly. And then repeat it, meaning let's regularize this. Let's make sure there's a process that we've implemented that continues this moving forward. It is a continuous process. There is no end to this. It is built now into, just like I can't get in a car without buckling my seatbelt, I can't leave the house without brushing my teeth, I can't go to bed without brushing my teeth. This type of cycle has to be built in at the core of our fabric in order for us to even have a fighting chance to stay one step ahead of the bad guys. How we can do this, and we've built a group, what we call panels, which are working groups across state government, local governments, territorial and tribal governments, and as well as the private sector, to come together as experts and to help build toolkits of plain English guides so we can explain to the hierarchy what's really going on in a meaningful way. How-to guides, which are real technical guides on how to do it. More importantly, how to measure it. If we don't have metrics and measurements, we'll never know where we're going to be. So the cybersecurity annual review that's in partnership with the Department of Homeland Security is a critical way to start measuring where we are and how we go forward. It's never about blame. It's not about what you did wrong. It's about how you can improve. It's how you can be better. And then additional resources. And then, again, mapping it all to the framework. So next steps, bring in your security person. Make sure that they've downloaded the toolkits. Make sure that they're creating a baseline so that you know where you are and you really have that sort of familiarity of your organization and what you have. Do a color code. Have a green, yellow, red as to where things are. Make it very visual. Make it very simple. Complete that baseline through vulnerability scanning. We will help. We were happy to help and make sure, and we've done that for a number of states already, to help baseline it and then come back another month later or 2 months later and show the improvements and what needed to get done. Use the plain English guides because they will educate everybody. Make that part of your standing process. And just get started. It's the stop that stops most of us. I told somebody when they were saying, my infrastructure is huge, how do I get started? I said, start every month and start going around and counting the computers. Next time, do servers. Next time, if you needed to break it up because you didn't have the resource to dedicate everybody doing it, it's much better just to get started and move it forward and have that process in place. Measure your progress because I think people are very measure-oriented, at least I am, and I think it shows improvements, and then repeat it and keep it going. So, in conclusion, count what you have, configure what you have, control what you have, patch what you have, and let's repeat, repeat, and repeat. General, I will stop and turn it over back to you and for questions and hopefully some answers.
Will, I just want to thank you for your leadership and for taking the time today to lay out that phenomenal approach and your leadership on trying to get this campaign instituted in America. I think it's very important. Trina, I got some wrap-up comments, but I think we should go to questions first, and then I can wrap up when you're ready to end the webinar. So back to you.
Well, I had asked a question earlier about how many states out there have a cyber security strategy or response plan in place. And Michigan and Wisconsin have indicated they do. I know there are others out there, but those two have said yes, they absolutely do have such plans in place.
Thank you for that. And for those who don't, I think it's something to take a look at because it's an important piece of the emergency management puzzle. I want to thank folks for dialing in. I think it's an important topic. And I think from Will's presentation, my view is that it doesn't make cyber any easier, but it certainly makes it understandable, and that's the whole purpose of trying to demystify it through this webinar. I would suggest to my colleagues in the consortium, we have wonderful organizations that have our own constituencies nationwide, that this important topic about hygiene is one that each of our organizations ought to think about adopting and trying to suggest to our members in our different organizations that they adopt an approach like this, something that can eliminate 80 or 95%. Will's used 85% of the known threats is a great place to start. I would also suggest that folks ought to advocate for senior leader involvement. It's, I think, a truth that many of the senior leaders across the country in every industry, very smart, very talented, but in public and private industries, government, you name it, aren't necessarily up to speed on cyber. And you don't really understand it until something bad happens, until you're the governor of a state that gets hacked, or right now the former head of the Office of Management and Budget when something terrible happens like that data breach. And then everybody's paying attention, and surely if you could go back before that event occurred, you would do it entirely differently and put a lot more effort into it. So learning from these real-world events and try to get ahead of the curve now, I think, is the right thing to do. And the really hard things that I think Will Pelgrin did a great job of outlining, the nation states that are attacking and stealing the data. If we're not practicing good hygiene in our own computers and in our industry computers and our organizational computers and our networks, we're making their job ridiculously easy. If we practice good hygiene, it's going to make them work harder to get into our networks, and they'll have to stay in our networks longer, and that increases the likelihood that they get caught before they can do damage, and we can trace back to where they're going, because they want to be in and out as fast as they can. The minute they discover, and that one report about, sometimes it's 200 days or in some cases 3,000 days, the minute they're discovered, they're out of there. So the faster we can discover them, the less damage they can do. And I would just end by saying, again, to Will Pelgrin and to Trina, thank you, Will, for your expertise and leadership. Trina, thank you for your leadership of the consortium and setting this up. And to my colleagues in the consortium, the time for this is now. It really is the best thing we can do for our collective national benefit and security. Back to you, Trina.
Well, thank you, sir, General Dunbar, and thank you, Will. That was really excellent, practical information that we can all take and implement from an individual standpoint and certainly an organizational standpoint as well.